Recording then.
All right, hi everyone. So for those who have not met me yet, my name is Arkayla. I graduated from Kent State University last May with my degree in public relations with a minor in marketing. I specifically took classes that related to community organizing and nonprofits because I knew that was the area of work I wanted to be in. Currently, I work for St. Louis Job Corps, connecting students to careers. I'm their business and community liaison, so I handle external communications and our community relations. In addition to that, I started my own business in February called Wildflower Communications. Wildflower, love is like a flower. I always wear flower t-shirts for all of my meetings. So sorry I'm not dressed up, but the flower t-shirt is pretty much my uniform for Wildflower meetings. So Wildflower is a communications consultation business where I pretty much help people figure out what communications needs they have and how we can tackle them. And this has been my passion for a while, and you guys actually have helped me mold what Wildflower is. I wanted to figure out a way to insert activism into Wildflower, and with you guys being my first social justice statement client, you helped me figure out how to combine my love of communications, activism, and make a career out of it. So thank you guys for this opportunity. Literally every project that I do with you on the basis is allowing me to build my skill set and allowing me to do this for other clients. So today, what I'm going to do is walk you through the first section of a social justice statement that we wrote together. In that first section, it talks about things like a corrupt system. It talks about privilege. It talks about the choice of what we're going to do now, act or be complicit. It talks about the emotional and spiritual weight that our brothers and sisters are bearing right now. And it talks about COVID and racism, and it tells you that it is time to choose. So those are the topics we're going to explore today. If you guys are ready to explore those, I'm ready to launch in. Yes, I got a thumbs up. Awesome.
Can I just interject one more thing?
Absolutely.
From the pastor's perspective, I just want to acknowledge the fact that the things we're going to talk about today are kind of charged. They are polarizing issues in our society, and the community that's represented here today is rightfully so a community of diverse ideas and mindsets, and that's something that I really want to acknowledge is the diversity of mindset and the diversity of thought that's being brought here today. And one of the things that I also want to talk about too, or offer you guys, is some open-minded practices to kind of help us stay centered in the conversation. One of the things that I know has always helped me in staying within the conversation without being too emotionally charged is taking the emotional reaction, noticing when we have a strong emotional reaction, and rather than immediately putting it to words, write down what you're thinking. Sit on it for 5 to 10 minutes. And then after those 5 to 10 minutes, read what you wrote. And if you're still feeling strongly about it, then I would invite you to share it. But giving that space between the initial emotional reaction and the actual articulation of the thought, I think really helps keep the conversation rooted in productivity, rather than letting it kind of devolve into the emotional, argumentative conversation that you can find anywhere on Facebook or social media, things like that. So that I kind of would just want to offer those things up too. If you guys have questions throughout, I'm going to try and mediate the questions that kind of go through. If you click on the participant button on your screen there should be an option to raise your hand.
Right.
And so if everybody could just practice that real quick, try and find that, raise their hand, and then lower your hand so that we can take questions that way.
It was there. It went away. Wait a minute. Is it under more, maybe?
It should, yeah, it might be under
Yes, there it is. Okay.
Oh,
So,
ours is
raise
under
hand.
3 dots.
I'm
Lord.
on my phone. I don't see anything. I mean, I see what is written, but not.
Okay.
Okay.
there's 3 dots, or it might say more.
More, yeah, that's what it says
I see a
on
bunch
mine.
of dots.
Yeah,
Yeah,
All right, if
try
there's
that.
3 dots, press those.
And in the far right, it says raise or lower hand.
Yeah,
Oh, let me try that again.
try that again.
No, I got symbols, and then I got chat, meeting settings, minimize meeting, virtual background, cancel.
is there, Pat, is there a label for participant?
Participant,
Wait a minute. Participants, yeah.
Yep, so tap on that and what does it bring you?
It has my name, your name, and Cassie, Betty, Lorraine, I guess everybody else's.
Are there
Go
things at
down,
the
keep
bottom?
scrolling down.
go down on that list.
I did. Pauline's the last name.
Are there
Yeah, that's what
at the
happened.
bottom, like, that might say more or something down there?
Just says invite.
Okay. All right. Well, if you.
All right, so if you're
you have-
over 80, then you may just chime in.
Okay.
Or physically raise your hand.
Yeah.
Or physically with your
Let's
hand.
do physically raise your hand other than that. And I'd ask everybody to stay on mute so that any background noise doesn't interfere with the recording as well, too.
I do have a hand like next to Betty, next to Lorraine.
Yeah, that's showing that their hands are up.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. All righty. I think that means we're all set. Arkayla, you can take it away. Thank you.
So thank you so much for mentioning that we have diverse mindsets. I want to say that everything I say here, you can challenge me. I'm absolutely okay with that. Just know that I will probably challenge you back. And don't be offended by that. It's just kind of the way I operate. I would love to challenge each other's ideas. And so just kind of map out how today is going to go. This statement, the topics that I just mentioned are covered in it. We're going to dive into those topics a little surface level, not too deep. A lot of personal connections because I feel like my story will help you guys understand it the best. And then we're going to break down this section sentence by sentence and figure out what words you think we should keep and what words we should change and why you feel that way. And then we're going to figure out how to write this section with your voices in mind and how to best deliver your social justice statement. So without further ado, let's get started. So the title today is A Corrupt System. It's part 1 of the social justice statement. So we're going to take a look back at July 4th in 1776. I'm assuming you guys have heard of that day a little bit. And sorry, sometimes I like to think I'm funny. Thank you, Connor, for laughing. So we're going to take a look at what things looked like on July 4th in 1776 when our nation was really formed, what things look like for someone who looks like me. So the number of founding fathers who actively had slaves was 5 of them. Also, the transatlantic slave was still actively going. The real 1776, I didn't have rights. My ancestors didn't have rights. It was a very different time, and the fact that this is when our nation was formed, and this is a document that we use to lead our entire nation, lead our decision making, it speaks to how racism can infiltrate our system, if that makes sense. Because when these documents were formed, when our nation was formed, racism was rampant. And it was accepted and it was normal. There was nothing abnormal about having slaves at that time. So it was really mixed in to everything that we were doing. So now let's think about how long ago that really was, because a lot of people like to say that was ancient history, you know? Slaves, ancient history was so long ago, let it go. But this tweet I found actually says, how many generations are you removed from slavery? I lived in a house with my grandparents and great-grandmother who was born in 1906. She was the baby of 8 and her parents were born slaves. It wasn't that long ago. So not only did these things happen in a way that formed our nation with routes that would help white people over Black people, because at the time Black people weren't even seen as people. It wasn't that long ago. So when we think of progress, yes, we have made strides, but just remember that these things were not happening a long, long time ago. This wasn't when the dinosaurs were alive. This was when someone's great-grandparents were alive. So now I kind of want to talk to you about a racist system that has been built. And anyone, I hope that you guys are not getting offended by the terms I'm using. I am trying to explain the best of my ability. And so I'm going to give you just 3 examples of racism right now. And with those 3 examples, it's going to be systemic racism that I'm highlighting. Systemic racism is different than people walking down the street calling someone a slur. Systemic racism is what allows entire generations, entire populations of people to remain in poverty, to remain facing hardships, to remain being discriminated against. It's systemic. So that means that it is happening with a purpose for that. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. Yes.
Kayla, something is happening with your sound.
Oh.
It sounds gravelly. Does anybody else hear that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does it sound better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Cool. So where did we miss?
You were just starting to talk about systemic, that it's 3 systemic examples.
Yes. So I'm going to talk to you guys about systemic racism examples. Like I said, systemic means that it's actually in place to hold entire populations of people down. It is created in that way. It is not an accident. So the 3 examples I'm going to go into are things called the school to prison pipeline, COVID-19, and then my own personal arrest story. So I'm going to let you guys know my arrest story is a little graphic. So if anyone wants to mute and not hear it, that is totally fine. I completely understand. But I think that the story that I have to tell will help you guys understand some racism in our justice system and things like that. So first, the school to prison pipeline. This is basically saying that from elementary age, students of color are put into this pipeline that eventually leads them to prison. For example, Black children are 4 times more likely to be suspended from schools than their white peers. So we have this title of Black students are bad. They have attitudes, they have behavior problems and things like that. And that's rooted in racist beliefs. And so when you have that and you suspend a child and you keep getting them in trouble, then they internalize that they're a bad kid. Once you've internalized that you're a bad kid, you continue doing bad things. So when you're suspended, then you're at home all day. What if you decide that you want to go get involved in some kind of crime because you're not in school? So that's the problem with suspensions, and that's why we want to introduce an example of how to solve this is introducing more interventions and solving children's behavior and things like that. But regardless, it shows that systemically, because you see that Black children are 4 times more likely to be suspended from schools than their white peers, there is racism and there is intention and fueling Black students into a pipeline that leads them to prison. Does that make sense for everyone? Awesome.
Sure.
So now COVID-19. I'm sure you guys have heard the numbers. COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting the Black community. And that is because of a lot of things. It is because of access to healthcare, access to transportation, access to fair housing, access to education, access to wealth. All of those things that I just listed have race involved in them, unfortunately. A lot of them are set up to where Black people fail. So right now, a Black person is 2.1 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than a white person, and that is from the CDC. And that is a disturbing fact. I've seen it happen in St. Louis. St. Louis, the north side of St. Louis is experiencing horrible death rates. And the cases just keep going up. Whereas St. Louis County, where you have places like Creve Coeur and St. Charles, predominantly white areas, they're doing fine. The people who are being hospitalized are surviving because they have the health care, they have the access, and it's just it's an entirely different world. The pandemic is hitting so much harder the Black communities, and it's because of things, like I said, racism in healthcare. So for instance, my friend, she has gone to the doctor complaining of COVID-like symptoms, and they won't give her a COVID test because they don't believe her. Many physicians don't believe Black women specifically, and that is actually an issue in our healthcare system. So you can see how that one doctor not believing her could cause her to not be diagnosed with COVID-19. So maybe she goes out and interacts and goes to work because she can't call off work because she hasn't been diagnosed with it, and then she spreads the virus. And then the people who she works with live in crowded apartment buildings where they live in like 2 family units, and then suddenly they're spreading it that way. So you see how it's a domino effect. Racism in different areas literally causes death in this situation because of the pandemic. So that's another example of systemic racism making a difference. Does that make sense to you guys? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to get into my story. So a little bit about me. I grew up right outside of St. Louis in a town called Belleville. When I was in the 4th grade, the town of Belleville held a Ku Klux Klan rally at the town center. And so I have always been exposed to racism, and I have always adamantly fought against it, even from a young age. In 2nd grade, is my sound messing up again?
There's a little bit.
It's got to be where you are. It's the wind that is affecting your microphone.
What was that?
The wind.
It sounds
Okay, sorry about that. There it is again. Okay, is that a little bit better?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So once again, just talking about me and activism, in 2nd grade, my teacher called only white kids to go to the computer lab, and I stood up and I said, "Why did you only call kids of a certain color to go to the computer lab, Mrs. Guest?" And then I was taken to the principal's office for making my teacher cry for accusing her of being racist. So those are some of my early interactions with race that really shaped who I am today. So going into kind of the week before I was arrested, I had been going out to protest within the St. Louis area, demanding justice for both George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the countless names that we don't know, especially the local ones in St. Louis. I went to one protest that was to close the workhouse. Our workhouse here was very corrupt, and it was horrific conditions. So I went to a protest to close the workhouse, and I signed a petition. The wind. Yep, 1 second.
Now, Arkayla, I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the workhouse. It's something we're a little bit unfamiliar with out here.
Yeah, so the workhouse had actually quite a few, so I'm not as knowledgeable on this. I can explain obviously, but the workhouse here in St. Louis had quite a few what they called political prisoners, so people who had spoke out against our mayor, people who had been involved in protests, and it was kind of like a holding facility for those people. And the workhouse would flood almost every other week, and it'd be horrific conditions for all of the people there. And so we really wanted to close it because it was literally taking millions of dollars out of the city budget just to unfairly jail people. So that was definitely one of our big problems.
For those of you who want to read a little bit more, I've put a link to a St. Louis Public Radio article about the workhouse too.
Yep, perfect. So I was at the protest to close the workhouse, and I signed a petition asking that Mayor Lyda Krewson, who's the mayor of St. Louis, asking that she consider reallocating city budget to remove some of the budget from police funding and put it into healthcare instead. So I signed my name on that. Many of my friends signed their name and addresses, and that night, the mayor decided to dox protesters. So she went on her Facebook Live and literally read our names and said that we were trying to defund the police. She read our names, she read our first name, our last name, and our addresses, which is extremely dangerous for us. And literally 2 days later, I was at a protest, and that's when I was arrested. Sorry, someone just started their car, but that's when I was arrested. So I was out in a place called Florissant, Missouri. Florissant is about 10 minutes from Ferguson. Ferguson is where Michael Brown died, was killed by Officer Darren Wilson. And so that just kind of sets the tone for what kind of police department they had there. We were standing on the parking lot outside of the police department when suddenly cops came out in riot gear with their shields. We started chanting about, why are you in riot gear? Because there is not a riot here. And suddenly the cops started chanting back, move back. And then they rushed into us. I was hit with a cop's shield and then thrown to the ground. As people tried to help me up, cops grabbed me by my wrist and dragged me behind their line so that I could be arrested. I was thrown to the ground once again and maced. I actually had braids at the time, so I had extensions, weave in my hair, and they maced my hair so bad I had to take it out because it was just continuously burning my skin. From this experience, I had a concussion. When they threw me down, it was such a hard blow to my side. One of my ovarian cysts ruptured, and the scar tissue ended up in my small intestine to where I had tubes stuck down my throat to pump that out. And I was in the hospital for a couple of days. All of that happened because I was standing there chanting defund the police, standing on a parking lot, just asking for people to reallocate funds. And I think that that story, my experience, which is hard to share, so I appreciate you guys for allowing me to share that. I hope that it didn't stir up any emotions for you guys that you cannot handle. I should have said a trigger warning first, my apologies. But I think it just goes to show how violent the justice system is to people of color, because all I was doing was standing and asking for a reallocation to help my community. Imagine if I had done a crime. I mean, and the cops should never feel like they can hurt someone in that way, even if they did a crime. But I'm just saying, I did nothing but stand in a parking lot. So I think that third example of the justice system really brings it together as far as how harmful it is. I think it personalizes it for you because you literally see what I went through. For weeks, I wasn't able to work at my same capacity, so I was losing money, not afford to pay my bills, just because I couldn't operate at the same capacity because of the injuries I sustained from standing in a parking lot. So that is a very personal story. And now I kind of want to launch into something that will help you guys see power and privilege in a new way. So we've talked about the corrupt system. We've identified 3 examples of how we have corrupt systems and how they are built for people who look like me to not succeed and to literally endure harm. So now we're going to talk about how the system is built for people like you to feel comfort and to feel power and to feel privilege. So I want you guys to look at this slide and some of the shows on this slide. Do you recognize any of them?
Archie Bunker.
most likely you recognize one or two. I can move this down because I know everyone's going to recognize Rachel down here from Friends. We've got The Walking Dead, Friday Night Lights. These are considered some of the most popular television shows pretty much ever. They have, so what I did is I looked up most popular, sorry, words are not happening today. The most popular television scenes in like all of American history. And some of these came up. So what I want you guys to think about is how many of these have you seen? How much does television and major scenes that make history like that impact our world? So when you're thinking about that, I want you to also to think about how many of these shows had a Black main character or Black representation at all. Not many of them. So that is one example of privilege. You get to see people in Hollywood that look like you, and you get to see them living lives like you, playing football, interacting with their wives, going to school, maybe not becoming zombies, but, you know, also getting married, having friendship troubles, things like that. You get to see real relatable issues and people who look like you battling them, and people who looking like you succeeding in battling them. They're not always being defeated by the world's problems in comparison to a lot of Black Hollywood, where Black people are consistently being defeated by the world's problems. So this is a privilege because you get to see that. And a lot of, I'm sure, you know, you've heard the debate about kids playing video games. Does it make them violent? Think about it in the opposite. Seeing yourself in the media, does that make you more confident? Yes, it does. Does it make you feel like you're normal? You're part of the community that fits in? Yes, it does. So that's an example of privilege. So now I want to get into my favorite activity, and it is called the Power Flower. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second. And I'm going to have you guys look at your worksheet. So it is called the Power Flower. And it is an example of how we're going to talk about power and privilege. And some of the things that are going to go into that are your identity. So what I want you guys to do is look at that worksheet. And if you can write down if you can write down some examples of your identity. So your age, your gender, your race, whether you were raised in a two-parent home. You guys already did it? Oh my gosh, some people are like a step ahead of the game. Amazing. Did you guys all already do
my homework because I don't have a worksheet. What did I do wrong?
Oh no, okay. I'll pull up the sheet. So it's just a worksheet with a flower. It's got 12 petals and you're allowed to write down some elements of your identity. And I can pull up the worksheet and give you one personally after the meeting if you missed it.
Okay.
You'll still get the gist. I'll have a picture of it up in a second.
Oh, thank you, Maureen. I guess I missed that in the email.
Yeah, so I'll give you guys a couple minutes to fill that out for those of you who have not. So think about things like, did you go to a public school or a private school? Did you grow up in a rural area or an urban area or a suburban area? Your financial status right now, if you went to college, if you got a 2-year degree versus a 4-year degree, those are the type of things to write down.
I've got 6 more petals to fill out. You better come up with something else.
Okay. So more elements of your identity. You can do, trying to think, if you've ever been on a family vacation, that speaks to whether or not you guys had the funds to do that growing up. You can put If you had siblings, if you grew up in a 2-parent household versus a 1-parent household, if your grandparents were around, if you currently have a car, if you currently own your home, and things like that.
Was gender orientation and sexual orientation
Yes,
covered?
sexual orientation and gender orientation are definitely part of that as well. Religious beliefs, that is part one as well. I'm going to give you guys about 1 more minute to fill that out. Yes, language spoken in your home growing up, that is a great one. If English is your first language, or your second language. Literacy, definitely. Okay, so now I'm going to read off a list. And if you have these items on your flower, those are the petals that you're allowed to color in. Now, if you don't have colored pencils to color them in right now, that's totally fine. You don't have to make it super bright and colorful, but these are the petals that you would be allowed to color in. Give me 1 second to pull up my list. So if you wrote down that you are white, you can color in that petal. If you wrote down that you are male, you can color in that petal. If you wrote down that you are straight or heterosexual, you can color in that petal. If you wrote down that you are Christian, you can color in that petal.
You got to go slower. I can't color that fast.
Oh, sorry.
What was the last one you said?
If you wrote down that you are Christian, you're going to color in that petal. If you wrote down you were in a 2-parent household, you can color in that petal. If you wrote down that you are English is your first language, you can color in that petal. If you wrote that you are literate, you can color in that petal. If you wrote in that you have an education from a 2 or 4-year university, you can color in that petal. And if you wrote in that your age is between 30 and 50, you can color in that petal.
Okay.
So I'm assuming you guys have some flowers that are colored in, correct?
Yep.
I wouldn't. So that's the big thing here. My flower would be pretty close to blank with color. And that just shows you all of those things are working and giving you privilege and power. Being white, being a male, and things like that give you access to opportunities that I don't have. So in this example, it's the opportunity to color in a flower. But in real life, it could be the opportunity to go to college. It could be the opportunity to survive an interaction with a cop. It can be things like that. So that is how I want to explain privilege to you guys. Now, I really like that activity, and I hope you guys do too. Yes, go ahead.
So I just wanted to add to the privilege discussion that a lot of the things that we're talking about here are well out of our own control too. That's an element of privilege that I think that we lose in a society that's very caught up in accountability, where we hear privilege and we think negative, and it's not necessarily a positive thing. It's helped us get a leg up in life, But again, it's something that's out of our control and is not something that we're necessarily to be ashamed over either. That's kind of a point that I'd like to make about privilege, is that we're not necessarily being blamed for it. There's no blame being cast. It's just a spotlight cast on the reality of society. Arkayla, if there's anything in that statement that was wrong or that you disagree with, please challenge me on that.
No, so I think that it's really important to understand that this is the life that you were born into. This is who you are.
Step backwards.
What's it say?
All right, so Dolly Parton said that we need to come out as white people from being ignorant innocents.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of going with, you guys are aware of these things now. You're aware of your privilege. I hope that I've helped in that. And so kind of the next part of the statement, what we're going to go into now is, what do you do now? Now that you're aware, it is your duty to act. And that is a really important part of what is next. So I'm going to share my screen again and let you guys see our statement. And we're going to go through section by section and just talk about if there's anything that we would like to change, what we can change. And we're going to go through section by section. So first and foremost, we want to recognize the emotional and spiritual weight our Black and Brown siblings in Christ bear as two pandemics threaten their lives, both COVID-19 and racism. Go ahead, Connor.
I just want to remind everybody of the hand raising feature. This is
I can't find it again. Oh, more. Raise hand.
And
Okay.
also just physically raise your hand too, not with that.
Okay.
Awesome. So our first sentence, this kind of taps into what we were talking about there being systemic racism. It is a weight on Black and Brown siblings in Christ. Is there anything that people do not like about this first sentence?
Lorraine, go for it.
All right. Yeah, okay. All right. First of all, can we just establish the audience for this? And is this going to be a passive or an active statement? And can we go off of the statements that have been written before, which are pertaining to this, is we will be hearers of the word and not doers only. We will consecrate our time, talent, income, and influence as heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. That's what this congregation has been for like 200 years. And we need to take that statement, which is our belief statement, and put it into this context.
Okay.
So do we start here or do we start with our belief statement?
So I would say that this is maybe a element that will include parts of your belief statement, but we don't necessarily need to start with your belief statements. I think that is solid. I think we should start here and figure out how to work your belief statement into these sentences.
Would this be a corollary to the belief statement?
Can you repeat that?
Would this be a corollary to the belief statement?
So this would be a guide to how you guys talk about social justice within your congregation. What I can do for you is figure out how to push it out on all of your communications channels. And sorry, the traffic is getting a little loud. So you wouldn't necessarily need to put this entire statement out and like hang it up and things like that, but maybe bits and pieces, and maybe things made, art made with the guidance of this statement, maybe lesson plans made with the guidance of this statement and your own belief statement. This is just to help guide you guys and how to talk about race relations, how to talk about social justice, and how to introduce it to your congregation. It's kind of like your key messages. You know how your key messages are kind of what drive your other communication? this document would be your key messages to drive your other communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Karen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I should wait the 5 minutes before I bring this up, but I'm, Arkayla, I'm just gonna put this out there. I mentioned this during our coffee hour today with Connor. I have a hard time with the emotional and spiritual weight of our Black and brown siblings in Christ. And that's because, I mean, like in New England, there were Pequot Indian slaves before there were African American slaves. And those Pequot Indians were enslaved in Connecticut in some level up until the time that and it was after the Emancipation Proclamation when Connecticut slaves were really freed. That went first in the South. So, I mean, like American Indians, I don't know how, I don't know if people are racially biased against them, but I don't think that they live the same quality of life we do. And so, and I know that Asians have come a long way, but there were times that Asians were interned in work camps here because people felt as though they were dangerous, they might be spies, this and that and the other thing. I think that this statement is fine, but I think as a congregation, if we're going to look at something like this, certainly the Black lives and what I have seen, I am appalled at. There's no doubt in my mind that all of these things are happening and happening to you on a lesser level, though, because there are less people. I also think that there's somehow that should be acknowledged. And maybe that's where it comes in, where it says brown siblings. I'm not sure.
Why don't you add Native American?
But I'm wondering if if this even crossed your mind, or if well, certainly your primary focus is your African American population, and that's what we're focusing on today too. I don't know what I wanted to do with that except for just put it out there. That's all.
Yeah, no, I can definitely speak to that. So with people of color, something that I've learned through communications and interacting with them, a lot of times to encompass people of color and not just Black people, you say Black and brown. And so that is why we have the and brown in the statement. From what I know, Latin American, Native American, Asian American, all of those races will identify with the brown part of Black and brown. So thank you for bringing that up. I do want to make sure we are referencing that it's not just Black people that have gone through a struggle in America. But I do also want to say that police brutality, what's happening in the United States right now, is at heart a Black issue. It's happening most actively, most harmfully to Black people. So it's important that we say Black in this statement, and say that we recognize that even beyond what's happening to our Latin brothers and sisters, what's happening to our Asian American brothers and sisters and things like that, what's happening to our Black brothers and sisters is what we're focusing on right now, because it is a tragedy, and we're recognizing that it is mostly impacting our Black brothers and sisters. If that
Okay, I get that. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Debbie, did you have something you'd like to offer? I saw your hand up earlier.
Yes, but I think it's been discussed enough.
Okay.
Arkayla, I was going to also just offer this up. This was something that the group collectively, with those thoughts in mind, BIPOC is also a term that is being used within, you know, inclusivity and stuff. Now, that does go different. Yeah, for those who don't know what BIPOC is, it's Black, Indigenous, people of color. So it's that encompassing of the Indigenous brothers and sisters as well. But Arkayla does bring up a good point with the systems being, you know, oppressing Black and brown brothers and sisters. So I just wanted to offer that term up, if that was something that could be, you know, or what your thoughts were on that.
put it in the notes and maybe we can include it as our terminology instead. Absolutely. Are we ready to move on to the next section? Got some head nods? Okay. So now I know that this one is going to be rougher. I understand that. So this is where we talk about privilege and power. This is going to be difficult. So talking about your congregation's exceptional privilege. Judging by this meeting, I'm guessing most of your congregation is white. I'm going to assume that. And from what we just learned with our Power Flower and with our TV show activity, you guys do have privilege. And so the combination of you guys coming together, you guys being white and you guys having privilege, means that your congregation as a whole has a lot of privilege, because a congregation is a big community gathering of people with all of their access to their resources. Because you guys have more access to resources, it assists you in building a bigger church. So one example that I wanted to give here was the example of financial status. So we know that it's easier for whites to build wealth than blacks in America. So how does that apply to a church? So most of our churches are segregated. They're predominantly black, predominantly white, predominantly Latin, and things like that. So when you have that, and you couple it with the fact that it's harder for black churches to build wealth, then you know that that 10% that's going into the church of your paycheck is going to be a lot more impactful in a white church, because it's more money. And with more money, you can do more in the community. So you can do mission trips to countries with black and brown skinned people and help them and introduce them to Christ. And you can do things like what we're doing right now. That is a privilege, because you guys have access to wealth within your congregation. So that's kind of that first part of the sentence, is saying that you have privilege. In that privilege, so if you guys, this next part here, in that privilege, we've been able to ignore the systemic murders of unarmed people of color for years, but no more. You guys may have been aware. We could change that statement. Maybe you have been aware of the murders of unarmed people of color, but I want you to consider, were you aware the same way that a person of color is? And can you say that your entire congregation was aware? So I know someone was just speaking. Go ahead.
I raised my hand. I didn't know if it was my turn to be able to speak. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I like that it says that we've been able to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that opens it up for the times when folks didn't ignore.
Mm-hmm.
But just having to be able to ignore is a privilege. So the fact that it has that, I think it encompasses all of us. Depending, no matter what level of ignorance we had, whether it was chosen or unchosen, it still is from privilege that we were able to ignore.
Yeah, I think you're right, Maureen. At face value, it may sound like a condemnatory statement, but it does kind of encompass just the ability that is there. Whether we exercise that ability is one thing, but it does recognize that underlying ability through the privilege that we have.
Yes. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next sentence?
No, I got a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see the hand raised.
This is a general statement about the whole paragraph. I think it's a generalized statement that's very, very condemning of everybody in the congregation. It doesn't acknowledge the good that has happened from many members of the congregation, and the history of the congregation has had some very positive attitudes, if you will, and very positive history. This does not recognize or acknowledge the good parts of what our congregation, and some of us as individuals, for us to be called naive. That may be true of some persons, but it's not true of everybody. having been in college and in a white college, and having one of the few black students in the college when I was 23, being a black person, I experienced firsthand when I was younger and removed a lot of the naivety toward racism. That poor young black fellow, didn't last the semester. But I saw firsthand the racism way back 55 years ago. So to use the word naive, I think is not a fair condemnation for all of us. We certainly recognize and understand the racism in the police department. Certainly when the New York Police Department union endorsed a president for being outwardly racist, that's happening today, and we acknowledge that. But then to call our whole congregation racist just because we have privilege, and I do appreciate what Connor just said. There's some things that we can't change that we were born with. We're not going to change the fact that we were white, that we were born into a family that had both privilege. But the question is, what do we do with that privilege? So I'm just having a general problem with this entire approach of this condemnation, self-condemnation of ourselves and our congregation with this paragraph. It just doesn't acknowledge some of the attitudes that some of us have that are positive.
Yeah. So I think what we could do, instead of the part where it says we have been naive to believe that the justice system would work for all the way that we were brought up it would, so that this entire section, I think that maybe we can replace that with a celebration of what you have done, what some of your congregation members have done, but still remembering that you should keep going, if that makes sense. So I understand naive is a very charged word, and that is, you don't want to offend people, and you don't want people to feel bad about the fact that they were born into a certain situation. But what you want to do is motivate them to act. So maybe here is where we start talking about the need to act, and we remove the part about being naive. I can completely understand that. Are you guys comfortable with that?
Kayla?
Yes.
I'm pretty okay with that, but I do think a sentence, instead of using the word naive, maybe we acknowledge that the justice system doesn't work the same for everyone. I think that's an important acknowledgement to make, is that if I get arrested and go to court, and someone else, a person of color, gets arrested and go to court, it's not always going to have the same outcome, even if it were the same situation, the same conditions, and we did the same thing. So I do think there needs to be acknowledgement that the justice system, as it stands right now, isn't equitable, that it doesn't treat everyone the way that, ideally we would like them to. So I think some sentence there, and then we can go on about whatever it was positive or whatever else. But naive perhaps is the wrong word, but I do think we need to acknowledge the way the justice system is.
Lorraine, you've got your hand up.
All right, so I have a little problem with the syntax in that it's repetitive, but also, I've lost my thought. Shoot, it was somewhere in what Barbara just said. I would like this to be a more, this comes across, again, very negative. I would like to put a more positive spin on the fact that we, as a congregation, wish to acknowledge our non-awareness, our naivete, that we do acknowledge it. Make a positive statement out of it.
Mhm.
So we acknowledge that the congregations, yeah, that's
I agree with you, Lorraine, about making it
Yeah.
much more positive. I find it very irritating and negative, and you just don't
Yeah.
want to pay any attention to it
Do it.
instead of
I know.
making it a positive.
It's got to
statement.
be more action, more. We accept the world that we live in. We know it's not perfect. We have worked, many of us have worked against that for decades. Some to no avail, some changed a few lives, but you know, yes, we acknowledge that the world is not perfect. We acknowledge that we have lived in innocence.
So an acknowledgement of kind of the points that we're trying to make here. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but a positive acknowledgement. That's
And
and
Maureen.
again, as structure, I'm not
Mhm.
overly happy with the structure, but there you go. That's just me. I want it
Maureen,
more bullet
Debbie, and
point.
then Karen. So Maureen, if you want to go, and then followed by Debbie and Karen.
I think that what I was going to say was similar to what Barbara said. Something about have the statement be, we believe that the justice system is not just and does not treat our brown and black siblings the same as we are treated. I kind of like the fact that there's more of a negative thing in there, because I believe it ends up shaking us up to act more. But I understand other people feeling uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of this is to make us feel uncomfortable, to get us to move too.
And if I could
So,
make a comment on that real quick before Debbie goes, I think the negativity that we feel around this is kind of where this statement is rubbing up with our sense of the idea of accountability. You know, are we blaming ourselves, or are we just highlighting the things that we've maybe been able to get by without really acknowledging? So accountability, I think I preached on it a while ago about how accountability and it should be, like we've been talking about right now, geared towards positive, constructive reconciliation rather than slap on the wrist or kind of a punitive sense of accountability. And I think we're definitely capturing that here. I would kind of challenge everybody to really sit with the negativity of that and kind of mull over, you know, is this coming from that sense of it feels punitive, or is it coming from that sense of, you know, is this just an observation of ourselves? And what does that observation stir within us? So Debbie, you can go ahead, and then Karen following Debbie.
I'd just like to have people think about drawing a distinction between what individual people have felt or done in terms of racism, whether you've seen it, done anything to combat it, is different than our congregation's statement to the world. So, you know, every group has individuals in it, and some people are more active in some ways than other ways. And I think that because this statement comes from our collective consciousness, that you know, I agree that if people feel in general uncomfortable with part of the statement, that it should be changed. But I think that people's individual statements, how they individually feel, and should not necessarily drive the collective statement. And I think that also this statement is from us wanting, I think that the issue is action. Whatever we believe, whatever we think is unfair, have we acted to try to ameliorate that? And I think that the statement part that I like the best is that it has that word in it, that we are choosing to act. How we do that is still a question in my mind, is how do we act to create a better situation? And that's all I wanted to say.
Karen, you had your hand up.
I took my hand down. I'm
Okay.
good.
All right. Pam, go ahead. I think you're muted, Pam.
Yep,
Oh,
there we go. Couldn't get the button up.
okay.
I think if we make it too negative, it's going to shut people down and they won't want to listen and won't want to engage, and it'll cause division. I think if we can just absolutely have the essence of the statement, that perhaps we have been naive or it just hasn't been in our experience. We haven't tripped across terrible, we haven't, someone in our immediate circle has not been murdered by a policeman or thrown to the ground. I'm so sorry to hear that. Anyway, I'm worried that if we make it too negative, it will shut people down instead of engaging people. That's all.
I agree with you, Pam. I think lack of awareness comes across better than naivete.
I do too.
Lack of awareness.
Maureen, you have your hand up right now.
Yeah, I was just wanting to make sure that whatever statement we put together, that it also is able to be heard by people besides us. And so, you know, people that have been the subject of this discriminatory behaviors of systemic racism their whole lives, I don't want them to read this and say, well, they think they're already doing everything right and they think they know everything, because we don't. And so I want to make sure that at least the statement rings true to a point where a person that has been subject to systemic racism can see a genuine effort to change, and not just say that we are already great.
Lorraine, you put in the chat the phrase, "We have lacked being doers of the word and been too often hearers only." I'm finding that might fit well into kind of what we're doing here, using our own language too. Is that something the group feels would work well in this paragraph?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I think it acknowledges that we have failed. We've failed to listen in our language. It may not reach out to community, but again, that's why I wanted to know who the audience is for this, because you write it two different ways. If you are writing to your own audience, are you writing it to a white suburban church? Or are we writing it to the world? Then we use different wording. The verbiage is, if it's gonna be our verbiage, then it needs to be our verbiage. If we are writing this to the world, we need to use more worldly verbiage.
And I think that's a fantastic point. So if this is going to be something that is both a call to action for us and a public kind of statement of who we are, what we believe, and what we're doing and out of those beliefs. I would maybe change, we have lacked being doers of the word and been too often hearers only, and perhaps clarify what the word is that we're about, being doers of God's word and too often hearers only.
Yes, and Maureen just says we're not living up to our own words. Yeah.
A little less insider, but it still hits that point while getting doers and hearers, which I find strike me as the really active and emphatic statement.
And that we need to recommit to give our time, our talent, our income, and our influence to the world in today's state, and however that gets, that we have, to somehow say that we are aware that our time, talent, income, and influence has not been given to those in need, not been given to those who have been downtrodden, to those who the systemic racism that our ancestors created by not having a plan when they got in their boats, and needed slavery to get them through it, created a world that has just become really messed up.
I think
and I'll be quiet.
Had some good conversation on this section. I'm going to throw it back to Arkela so we can continue and be cognizant of her time as well. I think you're muted, Arkela.
Yes, so I'm sitting outside and my computer is going to die. So we have had great conversation here, and normally we do these for an hour. So what I would like to do is create some activities and some readings for you guys that go with this last section, and send it out in kind of a newsletter to you guys, so you guys can explore this last section kind of on your own, without my guidance, and then maybe come back and do another meeting like this if you're interested in it. I hope this went well for you guys. I think it was great. I definitely am learning a lot about verbiage and how it's received and things like that. So thank you guys for your criticism, for you guys challenging my verbiage and things like that. But yeah, I'm going to send you guys a newsletter with some activities about acting and not being complicit in silence, and how silence is violence, and things that you guys can start actively doing with your time, talent, income, and influence, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Well, perfect. Is there anyone that has more questions for me? I would love to do this again for you guys if you so choose, and work through the rest of the statement that we wrote, because we do have 2 more sections, but that is totally up to you guys.
We can absolutely, I think you, I, and Maureen can work to schedule another session in the coming weeks for sure. Betty, can you clarify the question you just put in the comment or the chat? You're muted. I'm sorry.
I didn't put a question in the chat.
Betty, he's talking to Betty.
Oh, sorry.
I just wondered if she had a copy of our creed. You're using a lot of verbiage that's in the creed, and perhaps
to her for sure.
she had a copy of it.
Yeah, we can. I'll get that to her for sure. All right.
Well, that would be awesome. I'm so excited to just kind of dive more into your church, your messaging, and the things that you guys can accomplish. So thank you again for this opportunity. Like I said, I'm growing so much from being able to talk to you guys. And I hope that this was beneficial. I hope the setup and with the activities are beneficial. I'll send out a survey to you guys afterwards, just to see if you like the setup, so if I do this again, and how our next episode is run, how we're going to do that. But just thank you. It's been an honor. If my computer wasn't about to die, I would sit here and probably talk to you guys for the next 3 hours about all of this. Cassie, this is literally where my passion is. I love connecting and talking about activism and things like that. So Thank you again for this amazing opportunity, and I can't wait to do this again.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate
So I've
it.
got a round of applause. Oh my gosh. Like I need to think about. Thank you guys.
All right, Arkayla, thank you so much for joining us. Friends, if you don't mind staying on for another 10 minutes so we can just do a debrief on activity as a group, that would be fantastic.
Awesome. And I can also send out my contact information. So if anyone ever has personal questions for me or just needs help or anything else like that, I would be more than happy. You guys are, we're friends now. Lucky us. We are now friends. We are part of Wildflower. Welcome to Wildflower. I'm part of the package. Sorry, you got to deal with me.
Your email is arkaylath@gmail.com.
Yes, I can put it in the group right now.
Thank you, Kayla.
No problem. I'm so sorry I can't talk longer. I just didn't think to bring my charger. My computer was completely charged at the beginning of this, for the record.
It's a sunny
I
day.
have no idea where mine is. Oh, I'm down to 15% too, so.
Right.
Thank you so much again.
I had to switch over to my phone.
Thank you guys. I'm going to take off. Have a wonderful Sunday. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And until we meet again, here we go.
Peace.
Shalom.
Bye.
Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you. You guys as well.
Yes, stay safe.
Wear your mask.
Yes.
Wash your hands.
Right here.
Equal distance.
Bye.
Bye.
So I guess the next 2 minutes, I don't want to keep you all too long, but we'll go around kind of in the same way that we're offering feedback. Raise your hand if you've got something to say that we want to talk about. Just kind of a good debrief moment, maybe what you learned, maybe what we're still a little bit uncomfortable with, something like that. Pam, go ahead.
I just wanted to know, I guess the activities will be, today I think I really logged on because I want to hear what I can do or what we can do as a church to move forward to make things more just. I feel like the police brutality is just so huge. What can I do as an individual?
Sure. Yeah, Arkayla, that'll be part of that newsletter that Arkayla is putting together, resources that we can do. I'm hoping it'll be a little bit diverse based on people's comfort. That's something I've talked about on our own is the fact that, you know, we are a congregation of individuals and we have different individual comfort levels. Some of us aren't necessarily going to be out in the streets protesting, but we can do other things. So I'll to articulate that to her is something that we're looking for. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think this has been very productive and a lot of very, very good comments from everybody. And I tend to agree with just about everything everybody said. So I think it's going in the right direction, and the rewording. I am particularly cognizant of Pam's comment that we need to develop this so that it's accepted and not rejected by the rest of the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to speak to this is kind of coming off of what Jack said much earlier in the session, and that is that in order for the congregation to be receptive and not to be put off, if you will, in the approach, I think the congregation needs to in the church profile, we allude to certain things that have happened in our past that are really social justice things. We don't get into it a lot, but I think that bringing that up, bringing back our pro-abolitionist activism to the active hiring that we did of a black minister of music shortly after the bus boycott in there, and shortly after Little Rock as well, that we and Brown versus Board, that was something that we did in the face of much of the community saying, "Oh, this isn't a good thing." You know, so we've had a lot of a good history that bringing the congregation to embrace that Therefore, a statement like this coming up is an extension of that, as opposed to something that looks like it's being imposed.
And I think to add to that too, to take that long history of what we've done, and then ask of ourselves, what could we be doing now, and what will we be doing too? I think that's probably the next steps. The next few sessions that we'll have potentially we'll deal with that for sure.
Again, it's more of an action. Oh, I'm muted again. No, I'm not muted.
No, you're not.
Oh, again, it's more of an action statement. Can it be more of an action statement than a passive statement? I think we need to take our creed and overlay today on it. But to Steve's point, continuing from the past, bringing the past forward to today. This has been our creed since then. Our forebears lived it, and we should live it also. And
Absolutely. I'll go Pam. Betty.
Go.
Me?
Karen?
Yep, Pam.
I'm sorry, Betty, go ahead.
Oh, I thought you said Betty. Sorry. Go ahead, Pam.
Oh,
Karen's muted. I wanted to ask her a question.
Kendrick, when he was with us, there was a lot of protesting about other things, and he said that by us doing our community meal, we were oh dear, we were doing as much or more than people that were out protesting. I want to support people that are out protesting, but I feel it's more important to make sure people are fed, but that's just me.
Yes, there's different lanes of activism, is a good way about it. So, some people have one lane that they like to be in, which might be the active protesting and going out. Then there's the lane where people maybe donate or help fund things, or the lane where you provide community support and resource.
Yeah, that was, so I struggled throughout seminaries. The Eden's a very liberal, progressive-minded seminary, and a lot of kind of the voice that some of my classmates were putting forth was that there were some lanes that did more and were more valid because of that than others. And what really and I kind of adopted that in my mindset too. And what really took that mindset out at the knees for me, I had a class in my last semester of seminary where we studied kind of the history of racism throughout America, throughout kind of Western culture, and then kind of bringing the focus down to the United States, and then to St. Louis, and then to the Michael Brown moment. And the class culminated with bringing Michael Brown Sr. in to have a discussion with us. And he said, when the question was asked, what can we do? His answer was, whatever you can, whatever you're willing to do. A better help than nothing. And that just took that idea for me that one lane does more than others and just completely blew it up. Really transformative for me. And I think that's something that we would do well to promote within our own group, is that no one path is better or worse than others. Because just kind of going back to what I preached about today, there's the group that dumped tea over the sides of ship in the Boston Harbor. And then there was the group that formed the Continental Congress, the group that wrote the Declaration of Independence. There's all these different means of achieving the same goal. And none is, we can't dwell on what's better or worse. We have to dwell on what the end goal is.
Work together.
Betty, go ahead.
Karen? She can't hear me.
Yes, Betty.
Oh, okay. Do you feel better now that we've had discussions? Are you comfortable with what you've heard?
I am comfortable. I am more comfortable with the fact that with the Black and brown siblings in Christ. I'll tell you, I'm just going to have to defer to the majority here, because I loved what Barbara said. I loved Barbara's suggestions for how to reconfigure this statement. But I've got to tell you, I have Black friends. We come from a church that, you know, participated in the Underground Railroad. I think that a lot of this is very, very good, but I don't want to have to apologize for who I am. And if the consensus of the congregation is that as a group, we want to apologize for who we are, then there's nothing that I can do about that. But I think it's important to have this, but I think it's important to reconfigure that first paragraph. And I really liked the, I wish I had it, but the powerful way that Barbara put that. And so that's where I am on it, but I am one of many. And then the other thing that I want to ask is, when we get this as a final copy, is it presented to the congregation for a congregational vote, or is it done? It's
a congregational
vote.
Okay.
And there's another 4 hours. Yep.
So that'll, thank you, Karen, for sharing that. I want to talk about one thing you said. There is, and this is part of the whole accountability phenomena that kind of gets that bubbles up in talking.
We're gonna have to. It's only 17%.
We don't at all have to apologize for privilege, because it's so often all of those things are out of our control. I think all we're looking at here is an acknowledgement of our privilege and the benefits that we've had because of it, and then looking for the next steps as to how we can go forward and use that privilege in positive ways, for sure. I absolutely agree with you. We shouldn't have to apologize for the things that we can't control. That's unrealistic and unreasonable. But you know, to observe and lift up the things about ourselves that we know, you know, set us ahead, and then say, how are we going to give others a leg up with that privilege, I think is where we want to go with this, for sure.
And I think that Barbara's suggested verbiage does that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't acknowledge that, like, holy mackerel, all this has been going on, and wow, we didn't really have a full grip on what was happening out there. I get that. So, all right, I'm done.
I just want to say I agree with what Karen's saying about Barbara's comments.
Yeah. Yep. I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
Barbara, could you give us that again?
This was recorded. That's why this was recorded. I have to tell you that I learned as a teacher and as a presenter, when I present, I don't listen to myself, because then I can't hang on to my train of thought. So people say to me all the time, I loved what you said, and I have to like sit and really think what it was I said, because for whatever reason, my brain can't present and hold on to what I just said. So Connor recorded this, we can go back and look at it, but I think that what I was getting at was that we just acknowledge that the justice system has not been just. It has not treated everyone fairly. But I'm sure I said it better before.
Okay. Yep.
Go ahead.
Yep. Hello.
Yep. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. I as we develop this, I know our initial audience really is with the congregation itself, because it's taking ownership there. But in the long run, as we craft this, the audience is not so much the congregation, because the congregation becomes part of the voice behind the statement. It's to the community at large. So that's something that we need to make sure is how we are addressing this as an active voice to the community, and then what action we propose behind it, which is not part of the statement itself. But in some way, it's got to be more or less, this is who we are, this is where we're going, come join us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of touched on that a little bit. Lorraine was kind of pushing, and I think rightly so, for the use of that, of our creed, and the hearers of the word versus doers. I think that's really strong and powerful language, and if we can adapt that so there's a balance between both those buzzwords like hearers and doers that are recognizable to us and meaningful for us, but also finding a way to balance it so that it's not necessarily insider language, would be a good way for the statement to both be meaningful for us and be meaningful for those who are outside of our in-group.
Yeah, and this statement too will also be something to how people outside of our church can hold us accountable. So it would be a way for us to keep ourselves accountable, but whatever we write in there, we have to make sure that we really believe what we're saying, because action will have to follow. And so that's just something to keep in mind. I'm all for it and I'm glad about that, but that's going to be part of it too. Once this goes to the wider community, then people can say, okay, you said this, so why weren't you there? Or what have you done for me lately? Instead of what did you do in the past?
Right.
Does anybody have anything else they'd like to lift up?
It's so good to see everybody.
Well, I thought the way you were fiddling with your, whatever you're watching this on, you never get it settled.
Well, thank you, friends, so much for joining us today. This was really great. So this group is the group that did the initial real work on this statement. So part of the responsibility of that is we're ultimately, since we're on the ground level of doing this work, ultimately when whatever the final product looks like, when we bring it to the congregation, we're also going to be the spokespeople for that. So I would just lift that up as acknowledging that responsibility and kind of staying on top of the values and the things that we're going to put into this, so that we as individuals can explain it to other individuals, so that when the conversation begins to happen, each and every one of us can say, this is what we're trying to get across with this statement or with this particular sentence. So I would challenge you all to kind of keep that in mind as we go forward, that ultimately this group gathered here was that original group that is doing the work to move us towards this final product, so that when that final product gets made and gets presented, we should all be prepared to be able to explain it very well.
Connor, just when we're all done, could you pray us out?
Absolutely, that's where I was going.
Good.
And then can we have a nap?
Yes, that's where I was going.
That was next.
Friends, let us pray. And I want to start by paying attention to our breath. And taking a breath in through our nose, holding it for just a moment, and releasing. One more time, in, holding for another moment, and then releasing. Holy God, we thank you for your presence here. We thank you for the challenges presented in your word. We thank you for the lessons we hear, the call to action that lies within it. We thank you for spaces where we can feel uncomfortable, but know that we are within a group that loves each other and is a safe space to be uncomfortable in. We thank you for the learning opportunities that Arkela has brought to our feet. We ask you for the courage and tenacity to take those learning opportunities and mold ourselves in new ways to meet the call of your word. To not only be hearers of these learning opportunities, but that those opportunities inspire us to be doers as well. We praise you, God. We thank you, God, for all these things in the name of Christ Jesus, who embodied that spirit of being a doer and not a hearer solely. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, friends. Thank you so much. Go take.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.